here with Simon Ritter, Deputy CTO at Azul Systems. Hi Simon.
Hi.
So we want to talk about new features in Java. We had two talks about that topic. And let's start with the not so new feature. You just had a talk about the local variable type inference.
That's right.
So why do we need that? What is it for?
Yeah, it's a good question because obviously, Java being nearly 25 years old now, and we haven't had local variable type inference until JDK 10 just recently. But I think it's about making the code easier to read, easier to understand. And if you think about the way that we develop code, obviously we spend a lot of time writing code, but we spend more time actually reading other people's code and maintaining, updating code. So the easier it is to understand that code and the clearer it is to us as developers, then the less time we have to take to make the modifications that we want. And so using local variable type inference and var is about giving developers another sort of tool in their toolbox to simplify some of the code and reduce some of the clutter in terms of the variables that they use and just making the code cleaner.
Yeah. How to start with it for those who don't know it already?
Yeah, I think that most of the time it's fairly straightforward in terms of just going through code and replacing where you've got explicit type variables with var. But you do need to be careful. There's two particular places where you need to watch out if you're going to do that. First is if you're using generics, because if you use the diamond operator in the instantiation of the object, then you must make sure that you put an explicit generic type parameter in there, because otherwise it will default to object. And the second thing that you need to be careful about is if you're using literals and things like numbers. So if you assign a number 4 to a variable, then the type inference would infer that as an int. Now you might have it as a byte in the past because 4 is a small number. If you change it to using var, then it's then an int. And so you're changing from byte to an int, and that might cause problems in terms of the code that you've written. But most of the time it's fairly straightforward. You just change the variable names that you use or the variable types that you're using to var.
So okay, let's go to the recent release of Java 13.
Yes.
New features there. Any highlights? It's not such a big release.
I'd have to say that what we're seeing is with the 6-month release cycle, the overall rate of change is higher than it has ever been. Yeah. We're seeing more new features in Java in the space of a couple of years. But what we're seeing is that in individual releases, they can be quite small. JDK 13 is probably the smallest release in terms of differences. The only big feature in terms of the language was the introduction of text blocks. So now we can have multi-line strings, we use 3 double quotes, and we can include anything between those sets of 3 double quotes, and that will be a string, so it can go across new lines and there's no problem there. There are a few new APIs, but even in JDK 13 there's nothing terribly exciting there. So JDK 13 quite a light release in terms of new features. But as I say, over the period of the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of small features gradually introduced to Java. So it's a good rate of change.
And let's just look into the future. There are some bigger features worked on now.
Yes, yeah. So that's the key thing is that even though they're delivering small features, they're also looking at some bigger projects, things like Valhalla, which is around value types, improving the efficiency of storage of objects and values within objects. Things like Project Loon, which is about having massively multi-threaded applications where you can map a number of what are called fibers onto a single operating system thread, because once you get to thousands or hundreds of thousands of threads in Java, mapping them all to operating system threads just doesn't scale. So fibers is about having multiple threads of execution mapped to a single operating system thread, and then letting the JVM handle the scheduling and the context switching of those fibers on that single thread. And that seems to be producing some very good early results in terms of the development work.
But not targeted yet, so...
No, we haven't seen either of those projects. There's no actual release date for those at the moment. But with the 6-month release cadence, it's not going to be long.
Yeah, you mentioned the 6-month release cadence. There are more innovations coming, more releases.
Yes.
One question is for people out there, how to deal with that. innovation with that more
Yes.
features, more versions?
I think the idea is that what Oracle have come up with is saying, okay, well, we're going to release every 6 months, so there'll be changes to features every 6 months. But for people who are in production environments, what they really want to be looking at is the long-term support releases. Now, that's something that Oracle defined, so they said JDK 8, JDK 11, and then subsequently every 3 years will be a long-term support release. But everybody in the industry is following that same release schedule. So JDK 11 is the one that everybody is using as a long-term support release. Everybody's continuing to support JDK 8. So people like Red Hat, people like Azul, IBM, all of us are following that same idea of long-term support.
Yeah, and what we are seeing is there's emerging somehow a market of alternative JDKs with different support models.
Yes.
Especially as Azul Systems has something to offer.
Yes,
there.
yeah, exactly. So we have our product called Zulu, and we have two forms of that. The Zulu Community, which is the free edition, which you can download from our website, GPL license, completely free to use. And then if you do want commercial support, we have Zulu Enterprise, which is very reasonably priced, and people can use that. But you're right, what we're seeing now is a much bigger sort of market in terms of people creating distributions. And I sort of liken that to what we've seen in Linux, because you have Linux, the kernel, which is an open source project, and then people like Ubuntu, like Red Hat, Debian, create distributions of that, and people decide which particular distribution gives them the best features. And now we're seeing the same thing with Java, where you've got the Open JDK is kind of like the kernel. And then people have distributions, whether it's Oracle, Red Hat, Azul, and people can choose which one makes the most sense for them in terms of that distribution. But from a technical compatibility, functional point of view, they're all the same OpenJDK source code base, with the possible exception of IBM's J9, which is a clean room implementation of JVM. But it does pass TCK, so it's the same functionally.
So back to the features, in terms of language features, is there anything in Java that you are really missing? Anything not worked on? Anything you know perhaps from other languages? We have Google Go as a competitor.
Yeah, it's interesting because people often ask that question, and personally, I haven't found anything that I really wish I had in Java.
Okay. Happy?
I'm very happy with the way that it works. I like the fact that they're adding small features, and I mean, I must say that it's not so much a small feature, but with JDK 8, the introduction of Lambda expressions and the Streams API, that was a huge improvement for me personally, because suddenly the code that you write is so much simpler in terms of being able to process collections of data and do things in a very simple way, whereas before it was a lot more complex and you had to think a lot more about it. Now it's just like straightforward, stream this, stream that, and it just is so much cleaner. I like that.
Okay, then Java is evolving, Java is adding new features, that's a good message. Thank you,
Yes.
Simon.
Okay, great.
Here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, have fun at the conference.
Thank you.